Ooh, yeah. Welcome. This video is going to be all about Japanese keychains. I would categorize Japanese keychains into two main groups, souvenirs and toys. For souvenirs, I came across this book recently. It was published in late 2016, so it's still available to buy. They still print it. And it gives a ton of information about souvenir keychains, history. They even do interviews with the engravers and designers and sculptors. Only problem is it's all in Japanese. Translation apps on your phone do a passable job. It would be nice to know exactly what everything says in there. The other type of keychains are toy keychains. Now, mainly in Japan, they come in Gashapon machines and these little eggs. You've probably seen something similar to these in the West before. They're usually like less than $1. You can get a cheap little toy inside, but in Japan, they're highly collectible. You got detailed. They can be up to $10 in cost. Often the keychains are interchangeable with cell phone straps, like the little trinkets you can connect to your cell phone and have a little charm. They're not really popular in the West, but in Japan and Asia, they're pretty popular. In this egg, I got a little beer stein, and it's got little fake foam in it. It's pretty neat. They're little, like, plastic beads that float. And usually Gashapon toys, they'll come with a paper card, as you can see, and it'll list all the different ones that come in that set. They advertise, everything that comes with them, so they make sure that you get all the different ones and you'll buy them all. And they're pretty typical. There's any random things you can think of in a Gashapon machine. Little fake food items, anime characters, video game characters, any kind of weird stuff you can imagine. Gashapon is actually an onomatopoeia, which means that the word is supposed to represent the sounds that are associated with it. Gacha for the clicking of the wheel when you're getting your toy, and pon for when it falls down in the tray. Gacha, pon. People in Japan also use the words gacha gacha or gashapon. They're interchangeable. This next set is from the video game Chrono Trigger. This came out when the game came out, and they're pretty typical of character keychains, anime, video games. This is also an example of how they can be, Gashapon toys and keychains can be rare and valuable, because these are just about the only products that came out when Chrono Trigger came out and was a super popular game. So the keychains were very sought after, and now they're hard to come by and they can be pretty expensive. And part of the reason they're so rare is they don't make very many for a set of Gashapon toys, because they have a high turnover rate and they want to put different items in them all the time. There's entire stores that have Gashapon machines and that's all they have. Basically like a little toy store. This next set is from the video game Final Fantasy IX, and it's one of the most detailed keychains I've seen for characters. They're super high quality, and I haven't seen eggs that are big enough to contain these. I assume that there are. But you can see here, I'll get it in focus, how detailed these are. You can see his chainmail and the little rivets in his armor, and just how colorful and detailed these particular keychains are. Now remember what these characters look like for the next set that's coming up in a second. So this is another set of the same characters, just in a more cutesy form. It's a cultural thing in Japan, the kawaii or cuteness, and also characters that they change the art style a little, make them more smaller, larger heads, larger hands. It's called super deformed. Usually they'll go by the initials SD. And also chibi, CHIBI. The characters are the same, the art style is just slightly different. See, this set also brings up an interesting aspect of Gashapon toys. Sometimes when they're really popular, they'll have two sets of the same characters. So you can see on this one card, these are all the characters that came in the first set. And here's the second set, it has a number 2 on it. So probably due to popularity, good sales or whatnot, they'll release a second set of characters. Sometimes the same characters in a different pose or outfit. And about the cuteness, you can look that up on your own. I'm sure there are whole documentaries about that cultural phenomenon in Japan. I wouldn't dare try and talk about it. This next set is not from a Gashapon machine. This is just an example of a toy keychain from Japan. I assume this type of packaging is fairly typical. It's not as heavy duty as like Western packaging. This is a wind-up toy. You wind it up, you open it, and then they'll move. It's obviously from Pokemon. And this comes from a set of 3, where each one has different characters and the Pokeball is different. Now this next set are sound drop keychains. Make a sound whenever you push the button, and they have a little sound effect for each one that's different. This one is obviously from Super Mario. Came out probably in the late 90s. They still make them, this type of keychain sound drops. They're not as popular as they were in the past, I think.
Wanna bug me too, huh?
My dog does not like the sound that these make. Something about it. High-pitched or something. I put the little plastic tabs in there because it prevents the batteries from connecting, and it'll prevent them from getting drained or leaking. So if you have any battery-powered things, either take the batteries out or keep the paper or plastic tabs in to keep them going longer. This set is an example of anime figures. I don't really have many anime figure keychains because I'm not a big fan, but I do like the show One Punch Man. It was on Netflix, it still is. And you can see that these characters are also, cutesy, super deformed, where they have larger heads. And they're just fun. Now we're going to talk about souvenir keychains. And I mentioned this book earlier. There's a ton of history and pictures and examples. So it's a really good guide, or just interesting to see all the pictures. And usually they're flat medallion types, and this is the only 3D figural keychain I have, the train locomotive. And I'll just show a whole bunch of different examples. A lot of the ones that I have a few that are not in the video, but this is just a good sampling of what you can expect. What Japanese keychains to look like. This one is a really good example. A lot of the Japanese keychains have maps on them, and this one in particular, they made an entire series of all the different areas or prefectures in Japan, and you can combine them into a giant map. Which would be really neat to have, but probably impossible to get them all, especially for someone in the West. This is a really good example. A lot of them have this kind of gold around them. It's just a unique feature that I've only seen really on Japanese keychains. This one looks like a little envelope, a letter. Since a lot of these are souvenirs, it makes sense. You're sending like a postcard of your as a souvenir of a place you went. I assume this one's a bottle opener, but I can't be sure. There are a lot of different keychains with that same exact shape. See, a lot of Japanese keychains have bells on them, and that's really just a cultural aspect in Japan. Like bells, they found examples that are thousands of years old. I'll put a link to an article in the description about the cultural significance of bells in Japanese culture. But it's something they probably don't, you wouldn't even think about if you lived in Japan. They're just all over the place. So a lot of the keychains have bells on them. There's some shapes that they'll use the same, like that leaf shape, and they'll, put different things on them. That's just a more common shape, and they'll reuse them, have different lettering, different pictures on the back. Now this one, according to my translator, it's actually a commemoration to a building that was just finished. So not exactly a souvenir for a tourist attraction. This one's for hot springs. I've seen a price tag on one of these that still had it on there. It's for 300 yen, which is about $3 US, which is actually pretty inexpensive considering what I've seen other souvenir keychains in the West for. This one is a newer one, I would think. It's hard to tell exactly how old most of these are. I'm quite sure they're all 1960s and newer. Like this one I would assume is newer as well. But I would think none of these are older than the 1960s. Now see, this chain on this one is really indicative of Japanese keychains. You've probably seen one already. This type of chain. I've only ever seen that type of chain one time before in a French keychain. Most of them have this type of clasp on it. That's just probably the type that the manufacturer decided to use. Since most of these are made in Japan, if not all of them. And according to the book I have, it also says that they were made in Japan, designed and made. This This one is like the front of a locomotive. Trains are really big in Japan, not so much in America. And last but not least, one of my favorites. It's actually a souvenir from an airport. Who would think that you want a souvenir of an airport, but it's just such high quality. It's so neat with the little floating plane in there. Well, thanks for watching. Hope you learned a little something. Have a good one.